7 nations, over 600 million people, all experiencing state failure at the same time. Iran, currency collapsed 99% since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, water running out in the capital. Pakistan, 24th IMF bailout, nuclear weapons, and an insurgency that just surged 70%. Egypt, $161 billion in debt, 60% living in poverty, too big to fail, failing anyway. Turkey, inflation hit 85% in 2022, brain drain is accelerating, the model democracy that broke. Lebanon, 98% currency collapse, 80% poverty rate, total economic annihilation. Afghanistan, 64% of the population was pushed into poverty in 2025. Sudan, 12 million displaced, civil war, famine conditions. This isn't 7 unlucky countries, this is a pattern. And the pattern reveals something terrifying. These collapses are feeding each other. Governance failures breed economic disasters. Economic disasters trigger refugee flows. Refugees destabilize neighbors, neighbors crack down, crackdowns fuel extremism, extremism fills vacuums. A cascade, a feedback loop, a system failure. And once you see how deeply interconnected these crises are, you'll understand why this might be the most dangerous moment for regional stability in a generation. We'll start with a country that was supposed to be the success story, the rising star, the bridge between East and West, Turkey. The Turkish lira hit 28 to the dollar in late 2022. Back in 2013, it was 2. That's not a currency adjustment, that's a currency execution. Erdogan spent years defying economic gravity, slashing interest rates while inflation exploded, firing central bank governors who disagreed, printing money for construction booms. By late 2022, inflation peaked at 85%. A teacher's salary that once supported a family now barely covers rent. The middle class has been obliterated. And here's the kicker. This was the model everyone pointed to. The Muslim majority democracy that worked, the economy that tripled per capita income, the regional power that bridged Europe and Asia. Now, it's a cautionary tale. Skilled professionals are fleeing. Doctors, engineers, academics, anyone with a passport and marketable skills is looking for the exit. The brain drain isn't a trickle, it's a flood. An entire generation that came of age during Turkey's boom years now seeing no future at home. They're not leaving because they want to, they're leaving because staying means watching their degrees become worthless and their prospects die. Then the earthquake hit. February 2023, magnitude 7.8, over 50,000 dead in Turkey alone. Buildings that should have withstood the quake collapsed like cardboard. Construction codes ignored, safety inspections faked. The earthquake exposed corruption in every concrete pour. The reconstruction bill, $34 billion. For a country drowning in inflation and currency collapse, that's a knockout punch. Turkey isn't just any country. NATO's second largest military, host to 4 million Syrian refugees, a buffer preventing another migrant wave into Europe. If Turkey fails, those refugees move, and Europe's political landscape shifts. But Turkey's slow unraveling looks like a managed decline compared to what's happening next. Egypt is too big to fail. That's what they keep saying. 119 million people, the Arab world's most populous nation, a strategic linchpin between Africa and the Middle East. Surely the international community won't let Egypt collapse. Except Egypt is collapsing anyway. The Egyptian pound has lost more than half its value since 2022. Officially, it trades around 30 to the dollar. On the black market, push that toward 50. Inflation topped 38% in 2023, the highest in a generation. Bread, cooking oil, rent, all skyrocketing while wages stay frozen. The result? About 60% of Egyptians live close or below the poverty line. Think about that for a second. In a country of 119 million, roughly 70 million people are struggling to meet basic needs, working multiple jobs and still can't afford dignity. The debt trap is even worse. Egypt owes $161 billion to foreign creditors. A decade ago, $48.1 billion. The money went to highways, a new desert capital, military projects, weapons, vanity mega projects with zero economic return. Here's the devastating part. 45% of Egypt's government revenue goes straight to interest payments. Before paying schools, hospitals, or food, the government sends nearly half of every dollar to foreign creditors. In 2024, Egypt faced about $40 billion in debt repayments. They don't have it, so every few months, Cairo goes hat in hand to the Gulf states or the IMF begging for more loans to pay off old loans. It's a Ponzi scheme with 119 million hostages. Egypt adds around 2 million people annually, like adding Philadelphia every year. Every school, hospital, job gets diluted by population surge. Economic growth can't keep pace. Since President Sisi took power in 2014, the Egyptian military has become an economic octopus. Army companies producing cement, pasta, water, generals control real estate and construction, the military crowds out private businesses, strangles competition. Egypt is the world's largest wheat importer. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, wheat prices exploded. The subsidized bread program millions depend on was at risk. Emergency purchases averted disaster, but the scare exposed a terrifying reality. Egypt is one shock away from famine, and the shocks keep coming. War in Gaza threatens tourism, a vital source of hard currency. Suez Canal revenues are under pressure. The region is destabilizing, and Egypt sits at the center of the storm. If Egypt defaults or descends into unrest, the spillover will be catastrophic. Millions could flee across the Mediterranean to Europe or into the Gulf states. The Egyptian military, one of the region's largest, could fracture. Libya, Sudan, Israel, Gaza, all these volatile neighbors suddenly lose the one stabilizing force in the region. The Gulf monarchies know this. Saudi Arabia and the UAE have poured billions into propping up Egypt, but even their pockets have limits, and increasingly, they're demanding Egypt sell state assets in exchange for cash. A humiliating fire sale of national patrimony just to stay afloat another quarter. Egypt is the definition of too big to fail, but it's failing anyway. At least Egypt's government still controls most of its territory. The next country can't say that. Pakistan is a nuclear-armed state held together by duct tape and desperation. 257 million people, 170 nuclear warheads, and an economy that nearly flatlined in 2023. By early 2023, Pakistan's foreign exchange reserves had collapsed to just a few weeks of import cover. The country was days away from sovereign default. Inflation hit 38% in May 2023, the highest in decades. The rupee lost over half its value, breaching 300 to the dollar. Families that could afford 3 meals a day suddenly couldn't afford 2. Pakistan turned to the IMF for its 24th bailout program. 24th. This isn't a one-time crisis, this is a pattern. Pakistan launches from emergency to emergency, each time needing external life support just to avoid bankruptcy. And each bailout comes with conditions: cut subsidies, raise taxes, increase utility bills, the kind of austerity that crushes the poor while the elite, generals and feudal landowners remain untouched. The political situation is even worse. In April 2022, Prime Minister Imran Khan was ousted after clashing with the military establishment. Mass protests, arrests, violent crackdowns, a power struggle between generals and civilian politicians. By late 2023, a caretaker government backed by the military was in charge. Democracy on hold, crisis deepening. But here's where it gets truly dangerous. The Pakistan Taliban, known as TTP, has surged back. After the Afghan Taliban's victory in 2021, Pakistan's own militants grew emboldened. Attacks increased by 70% in 2024 compared to the year before. In early 2023, a suicide bomber struck a mosque in Peshawar, killing over 100 worshippers. Dozens of attacks followed. The military, stretched thin by political unrest, is losing ground in the northwest. Pakistan is fighting insurgents while the government is in paralysis and the economy is in freefall. Oh, and remember those natural disasters? The Great Flood of 2022 turned 1/3 of Pakistan into an inland sea. 33 million affected, 7.9 million displaced, more than 1,700 dead, $30 billion in damages. This wasn't a disaster, it was an apocalypse. And climate scientists say it's getting worse. More floods, more heat waves, more droughts, each arriving before the country recovers. Here's the nightmare scenario everyone's afraid to say out loud. What happens to those nuclear weapons if Pakistan fractures? A country of 257 million people, armed with 170 warheads, descending into chaos. Extremist groups gaining ground, political paralysis, economic collapse. It's the kind of scenario that keeps intelligence agencies awake at night. And Pakistan's turmoil doesn't stay in Pakistan. It bleeds into Afghanistan, where the Taliban regime depends on Pakistan trade. It spills into India, Pakistan's nuclear-armed rival. It sends refugees into the Gulf. It creates vacuums for militants to exploit. If Pakistan truly collapses, it won't just be a regional disaster, it'll be a global security crisis. Pakistan is teetering, but its neighbor has already toppled. Afghanistan didn't collapse gradually, it collapsed overnight. August 2021, the Taliban swept into Kabul. The US-backed government evaporated. Within hours, 20 years of state building vanished. And then the real crisis began. Afghanistan's central bank assets, roughly $9 billion, were frozen abroad. Foreign aid, which has funded 75% of government spending, stopped. Sanctions on the Taliban cut the country off from the global financial system. The Afghan economy contracted by 20 to 30% within a year. That's the kind of economic collapse you normally see in wars, except this was the aftermath of the war ending. The economy didn't recover when peace came, it disintegrated. By 2025, roughly 64% of Afghanistan's population lived in multi-dimensional poverty. Read that again, 64%. Virtually the entire nation plunged into destitution because the Taliban prioritized ideology over competence. They kicked women out of the workforce, half of the potential labor force gone. They barred girls from schools beyond elementary levels. They purged government ministries of anyone with actual expertise, replacing technocrats with religious hardliners. The result, a state that can barely function. Electricity fails in provinces, water systems break down, hospitals run out of medicine, and the Taliban's response is to ensure stricter dress codes and ban music. The humanitarian crisis is staggering. Over 28 million Afghans, 2/3 of the population, now depend on humanitarian aid to survive. Of those, at least 6 million are on the brink of famine. Children arrive at feeding centers so malnourished they look skeletal. Families sell young daughters into marriage just to afford food. Some have resorted to selling organs. This isn't a developing country, this is a nation in regression. Afghanistan has gone backwards 50 years in about 4. But here's where Afghanistan's collapse becomes everyone's problem. The Taliban victory emboldened extremists across the region. Pakistan's Taliban militants saw their Afghan allies win and thought, why not us? Attacks in Pakistan surged. Iran faces border tensions. Central Asian states worry about instability. Afghanistan was the world's largest opium producer. The Taliban's 2022 ban crushed farmers who depended on it. No alternative crops, just deeper poverty. The brain drain has been catastrophic. Engineers, doctors, professors, journalists, anyone with skills fled. An entire generation of educated professionals lost. Here's the cruel irony. The war ended, and conditions got worse. Afghanistan's collapse isn't just a humanitarian tragedy, it's a warning. It shows what happens when ideology replaces governance, when religious purity is prioritized over feeding people, when half the population is erased from public life because of gender, and its effects are cascading outwards. Pakistan's insurgency, Iran's refugee burden, Central Asia's security fears, the global drug trade shifting, every neighbor feels the shockwave. Afghanistan has fallen, and it's pulling others down with it. But there's one country whose collapse could dwarf them all: Iran. The pressure cooker is about to explode. The Iranian rial just hit 1.47 million to the US dollar. Let that sink in. 1.47 million. In the early 2010s, the rial traded at around 12,000 to the dollar. Now it takes 1.4 million rials to buy a single dollar. That's a 99% collapse in purchasing power. Entire life savings, pensions, inheritance, decades of work erased. Iranians now carry stacks of worthless bills to buy a loaf of bread. Inflation is officially above 40%, but independent economists believe it's much higher. Prices double within months, salaries become meaningless, the middle class that once defined Iranian society has been crushed into poverty. And the government's response? Denial and repression. For years the regime pursued ideology over economic reality. Billions poured into proxy wars, funding Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shia militias in Iraq, Assad in Syria, Houthis in Yemen. Iran's infrastructure crumbled. In 2025, Iran's military budget soared 35% to $23 billion. While people starve, the regime spends on missiles and nuclear enrichment. Iran reached 60% uranium enrichment, near weapons grade, yet these achievements don't fill stomachs or keep lights on. Then the water started running out. Tehran, a city of 15 million, is approaching 0 day. That's the point where water taps run completely dry. Reservoirs are at historic lows. The Amir Kabir Dam, one of Tehran's main sources, fell below 10% capacity in late 2025. Some neighbors already receive water only a few hours a day. Families ration buckets. In summer 2025, temperatures hit near 50 degrees Celsius, 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Heat waves, blackouts, dust storms choking the air. Iranians are facing the collapse of basic survival: water, electricity, clean air. And then in December 2025, something unprecedented happened. President Masoud Pezeshkian stood before students and said, "If anyone can do something, by all means, go for it. I can't do anything, don't curse me." The president of Iran admitted he's powerless to fix the crisis. Days later, Iran's central bank governor resigned as the rial crashed to new lows. The architects of the disaster are abandoning ship while the people drown. The streets exploded. Truck drivers, factory workers, teachers, students, even merchants from Tehran's Grand Bazaar, traditionally pro-regime, shuttered their shops in protest. When the bazaar closes, it means the regime has lost the economic heart of the country. Chants of "death to the dictator" echo openly in Tehran. Isfahan, Shiraz, fear is dissolving. Iranians aren't asking for reform anymore, they're demanding revolution. The regime is cornered, and cornered regimes do dangerous things. US intelligence fears the hardline factions within the IRGC, Iran's Revolutionary Guards, might not go quietly. As the regime begins to buckle, these extremist elements could lash out, strike at Israel, attack Gulf oil infrastructure, do something reckless to change the narrative. Very reckless. And here's where Iran's collapse becomes a regional wildfire. Iran's influence extends across the Middle East through proxies and allies. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Shia militias in Iraq, the Houthis in Yemen, Assad's regime in Syria. If Iran weakens, these groups lose funding and support. Power balances shift, some might grow more desperate and aggressive, others might fragment. Then there are the refugees. If Iran truly destabilizes, millions could flee into Turkey, into Pakistan, into the Gulf, into Afghanistan. Each neighboring country is already dealing with its own crisis. They can't absorb another wave. And let's not forget, Iran borders the Persian Gulf, through which 21% of global oil passes daily. Any conflict, any disruption sends oil prices soaring and economies into shock worldwide. Iran is the keystone. If it falls, the entire arch collapses. And before we go further, if you're finding this video valuable, we'd appreciate your support. We're able to produce content like this because of viewers like you. Now, let's continue. Iran's collapse is already destroying its closest ally, Lebanon. This is what total failure looks like. The Lebanese pound lost 98% of its value since 2019. Banks froze depositors' accounts, people couldn't withdraw their own money as their savings evaporated. A teacher's monthly salary fell to $50 on the black market. The middle class was annihilated overnight. Lebanon's banking sector, one of the prides of Beirut, became insolvent. The government defaulted on its debt in 2020 for the first time ever. GDP contracted by over 40%. The World Bank called it one of the 3 worst economic collapses since the 19th century. By 2023, 80% of Lebanon's population lived in poverty. Electricity from the state grid, maybe an hour or 2 a day. Most people rely on expensive private generators if they can afford them. Medicine is scarce. Fuel shortages spark hours-long queues. Malnutrition has appeared among children in poor areas, something previously unheard of in middle-income Lebanon. The educated fled en masse. Brain drain on a scale that gutted the country's future. Those who remained scraped by on remittances from relatives abroad and community support. And the government? Paralyzed. Lebanon's sectarian system has always been dysfunctional. In crisis, it became useless. Stretches with no president, no cabinet, only a caretaker government with no authority. Then came the Beirut port explosion in August 2020. Ammonium nitrate improperly stored, over 200 dead, state failure written in rubble. No accountability, investigations blocked by politicians who created the disaster. But here's the most dangerous part of Lebanon's collapse. Hezbollah is filling the vacuum. The Iranian-backed Shiite militia has always been powerful, but as the Lebanese state disintegrated, Hezbollah's parallel governance grew stronger. It provides services in Shiite areas. Security, aid, healthcare. It has its own funding systems, from Iran and from the black market, insulating it from Lebanon's financial collapse. While official institutions crumble, Hezbollah endures. This terrifies international donors. They don't want to bail out Lebanon if it funds indirectly strengthen Hezbollah, but without aid, the collapse deepens. And if Iran, Hezbollah's patron, is itself in crisis, Hezbollah might act more aggressively to secure its position, or it might lose funding and fracture. Either outcome destabilizes Lebanon further and threatens Israel, Syria, and the border region. Lebanon is a ghost of what it was. A once vibrant, cosmopolitan hub, now reduced to a failed state where people survive day to day on handouts and hope. It's a preview of what happens when economic collapse meets political dysfunction and foreign interference. And other countries in this cascade are heading down the same path. Lebanon shows the endgame. Sudan shows the bloodiest path there. Sudan didn't just collapse, it exploded. April 2023, what had been a tense power struggle between 2 generals erupted into full-scale civil war. The Sudanese armed forces versus the Rapid Support Forces militia. Khartoum, the capital, became a war zone within days. Fighter jets bombing residential neighborhoods, artillery in the street, snipers on rooftops, civilians trapped without water or electricity as battles raged around them. The war spread fast. Darfur, site of the 2000s genocide, was engulfed again. Ethnic massacres, villages burned, the country fragmented into warlord fiefdoms as government authority evaporated. By late 2025, an estimated 12 to 13 million Sudanese had been displaced, about a quarter of the population. At least 3 to 4 million fled as refugees into neighboring countries: Egypt, Chad, South Sudan, Ethiopia. The human toll is catastrophic. Tens of thousands dead, exact numbers unknown amidst the chaos, over 21 million facing acute hunger, famine conditions in blockaded areas of Darfur and Kordofan, hospitals shelled and looted, cholera and dengue outbreaks as water and sanitation systems collapse. This isn't conflict, it's a disintegration, and the international response, virtually non-existent. Ukraine, Gaza, other crises absorbed global attention. Sudan's implosion didn't galvanize action, ceasefires brokered by the US, Saudi Arabia, the African Union, all collapsed within hours. No strategic payoff, no easy solution. Sudan burns while the world looks away. But ignoring Sudan doesn't make its collapse less dangerous. The refugees pouring into Egypt, Chad, and South Sudan are straining neighbors already in crisis. Egypt can't afford hundreds of thousands more mouths to feed. Chad could see ethnic conflict spill across its border. South Sudan's fragile peace might collapse under the pressure. Sudan also sits near the Red Sea corridor, a vital shipping route. Instability raises fear of arms smuggling, human trafficking, and ungoverned spaces where militant groups can operate. In the 1990s, Sudan hosted Osama bin Laden. A collapsed Sudan could again become a haven for extremists looking for a foothold in Africa. And here's the cascade in action. Sudan's civil war is putting new refugee pressures on Egypt, which is already in economic crisis. It's destabilizing Chad and South Sudan, fragile states that can't handle more shocks. It's creating militant safe havens that could threaten the border, Sahel region, East Africa, and potentially the Middle East. Sudan's violent collapse is accelerating the breakdown across the entire region. 7 countries, 7 collapses, each feeding the next. Iran's implosion weakens Hezbollah in Lebanon. Afghanistan's Taliban victory emboldens militants in Pakistan. Egypt absorbs refugees from Sudan's civil war while drowning in debt. Turkey's unraveling threatens to release 4 million Syrian refugees into Europe. This isn't 7 isolated crises, it's a system failure. Governance collapse breeds economic disasters. Economic disasters trigger refugee flows. Refugees destabilize neighbors, neighbors close borders and repress. Repression fuels extremism, extremism fills vacuums left by failed states. The Muslim world is caught in a spiral where each country's fall accelerates the next. This is unprecedented. We're watching a civilizational moment, an entire region from West Africa through the Middle East to South Asia sliding into instability, poverty, and conflict. Hundreds of millions of lives disrupted, generations of progress erased. But there's resilience in the streets. Iranians risking their lives for freedom, Sudanese volunteers running clinics amid shellfire, Lebanese diaspora keeping families alive, civil society delivering relief when government fails. Yet grassroots heroics can't fix structural collapse. Reversing the fall of nations requires governance, reform, and wise international engagement. Will that happen in time? Unclear. The dominoes are mid-topple. The momentum is strong. If this trajectory continues, the Muslim world could see a generation of development undone and a new era of instability from West Africa to South Asia. The fates of these 7 countries will shape the broader region. Each collapse is a tragedy. Together, they're a wake-up call that this breakdown must be addressed as a collective crisis, not isolated failures. So, here's the question. Will the world step in to help catch these falling nations, or will we all get dragged down with them? What do you think? Is this collapse reversible, or are we watching the beginning of something much darker? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this breakdown valuable, hit that subscribe button and share this video. We'll keep tracking these crises as they unfold. The cascade is here, and it's spreading faster than anyone expected.